Today's video is brought to you by Cars and Bids, my online enthusiast car auction site that recently sold this, and this, and this, and this, and this. This is the new 2024 McLaren 750S Spider, and it's fast. It's fast in a straight line, it's fast around corners. The only thing that's maybe a little bit dull is the styling, because we've seen it before. The 750S is just an evolution of the McLaren 720S, which came out a few years ago. But now it's better. And today I'm going to review the new 750S and show you all of its quirks and features. All right, time for the quirks and features of the McLaren 750S. Starting with a little overview. Now, like I mentioned, this is basically an evolution of the 720S, which came out about 6 years ago to great fanfare. Everybody loved it, and so rather than a radical new redesign, this is more of an update, a modernization. You could call it a facelift if you wanted to, although it is a fairly significant one. McLaren says about 30% of the parts in the 750S are new compared to the outgoing model, but the big stuff mostly carries over. The general look is roughly the same, the powertrain, the engine is mostly the same. A lot of the changes are really more in the details rather than radical differences compared to the old car. But probably the most notable upgrade, even though the engine is carried over, is the power. There's more of it. The 720S had about 710 horsepower. The 750S has about 740 horsepower. And torque is up too. It's up 22 pound-feet to 590 pound-feet, which is a pretty healthy figure. Performance, still amazing. 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds, which places this basically into hypercar territory. But again, that uses the same 4-liter twin-turbo V8 mated to a 7-speed dual-clutch automatic transmission. And as for the lineup, McLaren is offering the 750S as a coupe or a Spider, the convertible model. That's this one, and it's just like the 720S, and pricing is significant. The coupe starts around $330,000. This car, the Spider, around $350,000, and that's before options, which, of course, are plentiful. As for other changes compared to the 720S, probably the most notable 750S upgrades are in back, and specifically the exhaust. You now have this center exit stainless steel exhaust. It's a big difference from the 720S, which had 2 separated exhaust pipes. And if you walk up to one of these and you're not sure which one it is, check the exhaust and that will give you the answer. The other big difference is the wing. McLaren says it's about 20% larger, 20% more wing in the 750S, because that's exactly what we needed, more wing. Now, aside from that, these 2 rear changes, there aren't very many pronounced exterior differences from the 720S. The 750S is basically the same overall design and look, but that means we have some interesting McLaren quirks, like the door handle, which you don't see when you walk up to the car because it's hidden inside this air intake. You reach in here, you press this button, and then the door opens up. No visible door handle. And you also don't really have visible tail lights. One cool trick of this car, the tail lights are incredibly thin and mounted here on the rear diffuser, and you can barely see them. If they're not on, you probably wouldn't even realize that they're there. They've done a great job of hiding these tail lights within the rear design. And the unusual lighting is also continued up front, where, well, you don't see very obvious headlights. Instead, there's holes where you might expect the headlights to be. The lights are mounted in here, basically inside the hole, so they're not immediately visible when you walk up to the car. Instead, this bridge basically contains your running light and also your turn signal when it's on. A very interesting piece of design that the 720S pioneered and the 750S continues. And there are still more interesting quirks to cover on the outside of this car. Starting with, open up the door, it opens well, up, and you can see a series of buttons on the bottom of the door. These buttons are not visible to people inside the car while they're driving. They're only visible when you open the door from the outside. And a couple of the buttons are labeled Tonneau with some arrows on them. These buttons open up the cover that keeps the convertible top in place when it's down. This is called the Tonneau cover, and when the convertible top is up and not stored under the tonneau, you can open up this area with these buttons and use this compartment for storage, because the roof is now in place on top of the car, leaving extra storage space where the roof would normally go. Now, the big drawback here is you can't accidentally forget that you've left something in this area and then try to put the top down, because it will break the top. But if you got the top up, you want extra storage, you got a place to do it. Now, that's kind of interesting because the front trunk compartment in the 750S is actually quite large. You can see it here. It's unusually large for a car at this price and performance level. A lot of these cars compromise heavily on storage, but this one actually has decent space, and even more space if you put stuff in the convertible top tonneau cover area. By the way, one other cool thing I love about opening up the front trunk in a McLaren is how you do it on the key fob. There are little raised dots on the fob to let you know you're pushing the trunk button in case you can't see it. If you're holding a bunch of stuff, so you know that you're pushing that button. And the raised dots correspond to the wheels on the image of the car with the trunk up, which is just a clever little piece of design. A lot of McLarens have this, and I've always loved it. But anyway, next we move on to getting into the 750S. The interior is absolutely full of bizarre and interesting quirks, but you start with the key fob. You press the giant McLaren logo to unlock the doors. You walk up to the car, and then the door opens up, like I already showed you. Of course it does. This is a supercar, and it has an upward door for attention and presence. Now, I showed you the buttons on the underside of the door for the tonneau cover, but there's two other buttons here also. One turns on or off the interior motion sensors, so your car alarm will go off if you have something moving around inside. The other puts the car into tow mode. In case you're wondering where those buttons are, that's the placement on a McLaren. But anyway, next up, I'm inside the 750S, and like I mentioned, Quirk City in here. Starting with, there is a button with a kiwi bird on it. I am not exaggerating. There's a button that just has a kiwi bird, and it says nothing, and it provides no additional context. It is the kiwi bird button. Now, when you push that button, it pulls up your custom-tailored individual drive mode. So the mode that you have selected that best fits your personal driving style, and you can configure it. Why does it have a kiwi bird on it? Because the founder of McLaren, Bruce McLaren, was born in New Zealand, and the kiwi is like the official animal of New Zealand, and so that button is an homage to Bruce McLaren and his New Zealand roots. It's weird, but it isn't the weirdest thing inside this car. Another great quirk is the roof. Putting up and down the roof is pretty simple. You got a little button here in the center, a switch. You pull it, the roof goes down, and as you can see, it actually happens pretty quickly. It's a fast-moving roof because it's a small panel, so you can do it at a stoplight pretty easily. Just get the roof down and then back up again, as you can see, also pretty quick. It only takes a few seconds to raise or lower the top in this car. Next to the roof button, you have another button here. That's the back window. There's a window between the seats and back that rolls down to give you more wind in your face when you have the roof down. Or you can roll it up and it acts as a wind deflector, and then wind kind of passes over the interior and keeps the wind out of your face. The cool thing is you can even put down the window when the roof is on. So if you want the roof in place, but you roll down your windows in the back window, you get a nice breeze in here. It's a pretty cool feature to have that button. But the coolest thing about the roof is this button here, which you can press to make the roof instantly transparent or instantly opaque, clouded. You just push it and it instantly changes to whatever you want. So you drive this car on a sunny day, you're getting too much sunlight, you push the button, you're not getting any sunlight anymore in an instant. Or you're driving it along on a nice day, you want more sunlight, you push the button, and now it's sunny shiny and bright in this interior. It is quite an impressive quirk in this car. But anyway, aside from that stuff, you have basically your typical McLaren quirks in the 750S, although that's a lot of stuff and a lot of quirky. For example, shifting into gear, you press these little button levers in the center, R and D, obviously for reverse neutral drive. Not your typical gear selector, but it's what you have. To get out of the car, you don't have your typical door handle. Instead, you have this silver handle hoop thing. You pull it up, and then the door opens upward as you push it, which is kind of cool and quirky. Another interesting quirk in here, the climate vents. They're all uniform circles, one on the driver's side, one on the passenger side, one in the center, but then there's also this bizarre triangular vent above the center screen. It doesn't move, but you can close it or open it using this giant vent switch in the center, and it's a little bit odd. Also a little bit odd, the turn signal stalk. You can see here it has a hole in the center of it. I think it's supposed to look sportier, or perhaps that's for weight reduction. You have the same thing over on the other side with the wiper stalk, a little strange, but distinctively unusual McLaren. Now, since I'm in this vicinity, one important change to point out with the 750S compared to the 720S, you lose that rotating gauge cluster screen that the 720S had. You can see it here. You would push a button and then it would rotate depending like on your drive mode or your selection. It could be horizontal and show a small limited screen, or it could be back up vertical and show a larger screen with more information. That is now gone in the 750S. It was always kind of a weird gimmick, but it was sort of cool. Now we have a traditional fixed gauge cluster, more like what you'd see in, well, basically every other car. Now, mounted on the sides of this gauge cluster, you got a toggle switch here marked P. That stands for performance. You can push it up or down. On the other side, you have one marked H. That stands for handling. You can push it up or down. And this allows you to adjust the drive modes of the car. Performance changes the acceleration feel. You can go to sport, normal, or track. On the other side, handling adjusts the steering ratio and steering feel and tightens up the suspension depending on what you're looking for. And by the way, speaking of the steering ratio, McLaren says the 750S a lot quicker than the 720S, which should make for quicker, more precise steering movements. More on that later when I drive the car. But anyway, next we move into the center here, the center control stack, where you have a fairly large vertical screen, reasonably large for a supercar anyway, and actually a pretty decent infotainment system in this car. It's pretty basic. It doesn't have a lot of crazy features and configurables and items, menus you might dive into. It also has Apple CarPlay, but not Android Auto. But generally speaking, it's a pretty good system. It's intuitive, it's simple, it responds to your touch fairly quickly, and it does basically everything you'd want it to do. It may not be the most cutting-edge tech, but it has all the right stuff. Now, in order to operate it, this button on the bottom, which is also the volume dial if you twist it, or if you push it, it's the home button. You press it to go to the home screen. The image shown on that button is McLaren's headquarters as seen from above. It has this exact design, as you can see here, and now translated onto this button. It's an interesting home button instead of like a picture of a house, but it's a little bit more personalized McLaren. Now, also worth pointing out that this infotainment screen in the center incorporates the climate controls. So you don't have physical climate controls. Any adjustment has to be made through the screen, but it's fairly simple. It's always fixed at the bottom of the screen, easy to change the temperature as you're seeing here. And if you want to change anything more than that, you just press the center and the climate screen pops up. And yes, you still have the little McLaren race car driver guy that allows you to direct the airflow. Instead of a boring normal guy like in every other car, the race car driver guy, because it's a McLaren, which I think is cool. By the way, also worth pointing out, on this climate menu, you have heated seats, which is a nice luxury touch. Not a lot of supercars have it, but this one does. And one other interesting feature of the infotainment system, you can change the ambient lighting color inside the car. It's pretty simple. You just go into the ambient lighting component and then choose the color you want. Another thing you don't always see in supercar infotainment systems, but here it is in this one. Now, as for the other screen in this car, the gauge cluster screen, going back to the gauge cluster, I would say it's fine, but not amazing. The default display is pretty good. It's crisp, it's clear, it has a a lot of good information, but you can't really do much with it from there. When you change into the race drive mode, the gauge display changes to this sort of a more focused, racy display, which does look kind of cool. But other than that, reconfiguring this display is difficult. You can only really change the left side of the screen, and even then you have to use this clunky switch to go up, down, back, forth through menus, and it's really not incredibly intuitive or easy. It works just fine, but it's not my favorite gauge cluster screen, let's say, and you have kind of limited visibility in what you can change. Now, one other important item to keep in mind inside the 750S, this car has basically no interior storage. That's not unusual for a supercar, although this one is particularly bad. There's no glove box in the 750S where you can put stuff, and there's no door panel storage pockets because the doors go up and stuff would fall out. So basically all you have is this center armrest lifts up to reveal a center console storage. Between the two seat backs you have a net here where you can put some smaller items, I suppose, if you want to, and then, well, frankly, that's basically about it. You have two cup holders in this car. You have one here in the center of the seats, very visible, and then you have a second one that is hidden underneath the center screen. That's kind of an interesting little hiding spot, but you can't put much there aside from, well, a cup. And you also have a storage spot for the key, which is located here next to the power top button. You can stick the key in there, so I guess it's looking at you while you drive. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you can. Aside from that stuff, not much storage in this interior. Good thing then that you have the tonneau cover storage compartment behind the seats where you can stick more stuff if you want to. All right, driving the McLaren 750S. Now, I gotta say, you know, my feeling on McLaren generally is that it's not a brand for enthusiasts. It's more a brand for rich guys who want to go fast. But if you're a rich guy who wants to go fast, this car delivers. This thing is incredible. Absolutely incredible. Now, the reason I say that McLaren is not necessarily a brand for enthusiasts is because Ferrari has this long history going back to the 40s, these old beautiful cars that became modern beautiful cars. And McLaren has shown up within the last few years, and I know they have a racing history, but within the last few years, and they've just made kind of a lot of variations of the same car, but they're all really powerful and they all look insane. So it gets a lot of attention and it lets you go really fast and show your friends, but it doesn't have quite the cachet, the heritage, the history of these other brands. But from a pure driving perspective, sitting in the car and pointing and shooting the car where you want to go, it's hard to argue with just how much fun. Oh, again, rich guys who want to go fast. If you want to show off, if you want to make people just drop their jaw in the passenger seat at how insanely quick your car is, this is the car for that. And specifically, this one is the car for that, the 750S. You know, the 720S, at the time it came out 5 years ago, was an amazing car because it really had basically hypercar levels of performance, acceleration, handling, but for supercar pricing. It was a bargain, which is hard to believe because it cost $300,000. But when you looked at the numbers, its performance numbers were closer to cars that cost $1 million, like the 918 Spider. Well, the 750S is here, and now it carries on the tradition. It's got even a little bit more power, it's got even a little bit more torque, and it's just gonna kick you in the face a little bit more. Oh. Woo! It's just such a thrill to drive. It is so absolutely exciting, and it is so unbelievably fast. It also shifts incredibly quickly. The shifts are a little rougher than you might expect for a dual clutch, but I think that actually kind of contributes to the fun of the car. It makes it feel a little bit more mechanical, which more and more dual clutch cars aren't really. It gives you a little bit more of a sensation of speed too. You pull the paddle, you vroom into the next gear. It's kind of nice. Man, vroom! Now, the other thing about the 750S is it handles tremendously, tremendously well. It's a really sharp car. It's absolutely glued to the ground. It feels very stable. The wheels are, far apart. They're wide. The engine is in the middle. All that stuff makes for a great handling experience. A car that is completely flat and cornering and that gives you a lot of confidence. But the thing that I think is really impressive about the latest supercars in general, but McLaren especially, is the steering precision. The car just has this incredible steering precise feel that, like, you can point it and it will instantly do exactly what you're asking of it. And I feel like that's improved even from the 750S over the 720S, which was already pretty incredible at that. You now have this steering precision that, like, you make any slight movement and instantaneously your direction is changing and things are changing for where you're going. I mean, the car is just so quick. Now, one thing I will say that I've never quite understood, you know, people talk about how these cars, the McLaren specifically, because of their suspension, have this ability to be kind of daily drivable and incredibly fast track cars. I never quite got that. I feel like the suspension is actually pretty harsh. It may not be quite as harsh as like a Pista or some of the other like crazy exotics, but it isn't what I would call like incredibly compliant, luxurious, or comfortable. You're in an exotic car. I mean, you're really getting the full exotic car experience for sure. But the good news is that comes with the great trade-off of absolutely amazing handling, absolutely amazing steering, an incredible performance, great sound. I mean, this car really delivers the true, full supercar experience. If you want to go fast, if you want to impress people, if you want to turn heads, if you want to just kill it, from a performance perspective, this car is absolutely the way to do it. And even though it's been 5 years since the 720S came out, it still is among the fastest, most impressive modern performance cars. And now the 750S has taken that to yet another new level. God, it's quick. It just changes directions and can move around so quickly on the road. You could just go anywhere, you could dart around. The steering and handling, the precision of that is just absolutely fantastic. You just feel like you can go anywhere and you are an absolute hero. The car is so stable and so confidence inspiring, and the steering is just so fast. There's nothing you can't do in this car, or at least that's how it feels. And so that's the new 2024 McLaren 750S Spider. This car is amazing. The styling is maybe starting to feel a little bit tired, a little bit familiar, but the performance definitely isn't. What a car. And now it's time to give the 750S a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 70 out of 100, which is the exact same score the 720S Spider got. That makes sense because, frankly, there's a lot of similarities. The way they look, the way they drive, the way they're going to be perceived by buyers and enthusiasts. The 750S is an advancement for sure, but a fairly small one, not enough to move the needle forward in the difficult world of advancing past 70 DougScore points. However, just like the 720S, the 750S is an excellent supercar, and its performance and look will appeal directly to the target audience.